Hi there. This is the Perio Patient Podcast, a podcast for my patients and anyone else who cares to listen. My name is Dr. Ben Young, and I am a periodontist living and working in the beautiful city of San Antonio in the great state of Texas. Today's podcast is in response to a question I received by email, which is simply this: why would an implant fail? It's a fair question. Dental implants are expensive devices, and there is certainly an assumption that they will last the rest of someone's life. From an engineering standpoint, this looks realistic, and in fact, it is true that of all the dental restorations we have available in treatment today, the dental implant lasts the longest. And I've said it before on this podcast that the development of the modern dental implant is an extraordinary game changer that has occurred in my lifetime. Let me put it this way. While I was in dental school, the most popular dental implants were of different designs and techniques that no longer exist. And we were taught at that time that the risks for placing dental implants were generally too high for the dental school to be encouraging anyone except research institutions to get involved. Then, all of a sudden, and around the time I was beginning my periodontics residency, the current implant was introduced, and I was in the class as a lowly resident watching from the back row at Wilford Hall Medical Center when some of the very first lectures and courses in North America were being delivered. This was 1985. On the one hand, we've come a long way, baby, with more knowledge and methods for improving the outcome of dental implant delivery and restorations. But on the other hand, the basic principles that were introduced back then in how to enable bone cells to essentially fuse to the implant surface are still in play. But with time, we also have had the time to see implant failures. And I spoke about the 3 types of failures in episode 68, entitled About Dental Implants. I'll link to that podcast in the notes below. To go even further in this area today, I did a quick literature search on causes of implant failure, and these are some of the things we all might consider. I'll list these articles and links on the script for this podcast published in the blog section of my website, and I will give a link in the notes below on how to get to where this script is located, should you be interested. In the International Journal of Oral Maxillofacial Implants in 2009, there was a report called History of Treated Periodontitis and Smoking as Risks for Implant Therapy. They stated that there is an increased risk of peri-implantitis in smokers compared with non-smokers. Reported odds ratios from 3.6 to 4.6. And what this means is that the odds of a problem occurring if you are a smoker over a non-smoker is 3.6 to 4.6 times greater. The combination of a history of treated periodontitis and smoking increases the risk of implant failure and peri-implant bone loss, but they don't say to what extent. Certainly more than smoking alone, but the periodontitis one is still being studied, and we're studying as a separate variable. Here's an article published in 2018 studying nicotine as a predictor of success or failure in dental implants. It was a retrospective study, meaning it looked at data collected during the routine course of treatment. A prospective study, prospective meaning looking forward, is a designed study, usually with a control and test group. The results showed, first of all, the males had a slightly greater failure rate compared to females. For this reason, they broke the results out for males and females separately. So let's start with males. If the gentleman smoked, their failure rate was 6.13%. And if they didn't smoke, their failure rate was 2.98%. Those are big numbers. Let's round them out. 6% failure of smoking men, 3% failure of non-smoking men. Well, this shows, first of all, a doubling of risk. But second of all, the success rate is still in the mid to high 90s, regardless of whether the individual smokes or not. For smoking women, the failure rate was 5%, and non-smoking women was 0.9%. This actually shows a worse response for women if they smoked compared to not smoking when compared with men. Again, the success rate for both groups is high. One other point to make here. I think this report actually shows the weakness of a retrospective study because of the difference seen between men and women, because unless there is some genetic hormonal reason for the differences, it is really unclear, at least to me, that a real or clinically significant difference exists. Which brings me to a little nuanced point about statistics for my patients only, because I want you to be the smartest in the room. It's useful for you to understand this. Something can be statistically significant and clinically insignificant. In other words, people can tell you that a study showed a significant difference between those who took brand A and those who took brand B. But it may still not be clinically significant. Yes, it is easy to, let's say, misinform using statistics. Another thing to consider when looking at implant failure has to do with how the implant will be used to restore a mouth. Will it be used to replace a single tooth, a few teeth, or the entire arch of teeth? Well, here's a study entitled Early Complete Failures of Fixed Implant-Supported Prostheses in the Edentulous Maxilla, a 3-year analysis of 17 consecutive cluster failure patients. All right, that's a lot, and that's the way these scientific titles go. They're trying to give the prospective reader as much information as they can so they know that they're not going to waste their time by reading this article, or that they need to move on. So, early complete failures of fixed implant-supported prosthesis. These are edentulous, no teeth, upper jaw, replacing multiple implants and then fixing the prosthesis or the teeth by screws onto the tops of all of the implants. So they were looking at clusters of implant failures in this group. It was still a retrospective study of 1,267 consecutively treated patients in one clinic. Point here is this clinic did a lot of this kind of treatment of full arch, upper jaw. The failures they were studying were of those who had multiple implants failed under teeth that, again, I said were screw attached. Out of the 1,267 consecutively treated patients, only 17 met the criteria they wanted to study. This is a failure rate of 1.3%. They speculated on implant lengths, but most of the implants they placed, they stated, were shorter, so this would likely have skewed the data. In addition, they thought that there was a greater risk with smokers and those who had periodontal disease in the opposing arch, which in this study would be the lower jaw or mandible. Another study looked at implant length and diameter on survival rates. This one was published in 2006 and stated that the use of a short or wide implant may be considered in sites thought unfavorable for implant success, such as those associated with bone resorption or previous injury and trauma. Well, that's interesting, and also points out that the more we work with implants, the more often we are attempting to do things in very difficult locations where there's been a lot of bone loss already. And sometimes that sets up implants for potential failure when compared to the standard implant placed where there's enough bone. So one of the reasons that implants can fail that I think you need to understand is that you need to have a certain amount of bone surrounding an implant. Otherwise, you'll lose a perfectly good implant. Just like you can lose a perfectly good tooth to periodontal disease, the bone around it is lost and the tooth comes out. The bone around an implant can be lost and the implant comes out. Same principles can apply. I do think one of the helpful trends in dental implant placement is the finding that usually the longest implants are no better than what were once considered short implants. Today, these implants would be considered standard average implants, but they are in the length of 8 millimeters to 10 millimeters. But there are limits even to this. If you get too short, then you're losing support, just like we've just mentioned. The same with diameters of implants. It is possible to reduce the metal of an implant down to a point where it is much weaker. Also, when implant diameters become too small in the area of what we call mini implants, then restorative options are fewer. Are there indications for the mini implants? Yes, when there's not enough bone volume for a standard diameter implant. And a standard diameter is usually slightly under 4 millimeters. The mini implants can go down to roughly 1.8 millimeters. A classic use of the mini implant is for tiny teeth, not a really great idea, but also for the edentulous mandible where the jaw is so thin that there isn't enough volume to place large implants, but you can put in mini implants which help to hold a denture. And this is accepting the idea that over time those implants can fail, but they're easy to place, so what you simply do is remove the failed one, place a new one, and keep going. It's a very specific issue problem, but for those who have that problem, it can be much better. It can be the difference between whether or not they can wear a lower denture or not, so it's important. It just may not be your problem. Let me conclude with a final study. This is a 10-year retrospective study of assessment of prevalence and risk factors of dental implant failures. All right, how did they do this one? Again, retrospective, looking back, conducted on 826 patients who received 1,420 dental implants in both genders, and they looked at, they had data on length of implant, diameter, locations, bone quality, risk factors such as smoking, diabetes history, hypertension, and the rest. They went back and looked at all of their records. Of all of these implants that were placed, the number of failures I don't believe is easily seen. They didn't add it to their results, but they break out the percentage of failures in the different categories. Because I don't know the total number of failures, I don't know what to make of the rest of the data. I'd have to study it more, and I'm not inclined to care to do that. So I leave it for you if you wish to study that. But the risk factors, the risk factors that they included are softest types of bone. Think thin, frail, elderly people with osteoporosis. Also smoking, and then hypertension and diabetes. And I will say if a person is diabetic but well controlled, they shouldn't be any different. That's in general. Also, people with a history of strokes, cerebral vascular disease, can have a risk for dental implant placement. I don't know the correlation there, but if somebody's having strokes, placement of dental implants has to be really carefully studied to make sure it's safe to do. I'll leave it there. I think you get the idea that implant failure does exist, but it is small. There are risk factors. And finally, go back and take a listen to my podcast on vitamin D if you haven't. Some of the problems surgeons have been believing were due to infections following the placement of implants, and I being one of them, are finding out that possibly this is due to a vitamin D deficiency. And so I think there's a lot more to come out about vitamin D, both on the side of reducing the risks of infections, but also strengthening bone. And the fact that supplements are really indicated because we can't rely exclusively on our access to sun. And in fact, we've gotten protective as a society to reduce skin cancer, so we're using a lot of sunscreens, which then affects vitamin D development in our bodies. So I think supplements are a good idea. Anyway, we'll stop it here. Go rest your brain. This has been the Perio Patient Podcast, and I am still Dr. Ben Young. Thanks for listening. Bye for now.